he'd come in on a very large raid. He was having a battle down in London, but it weren't going too well for him, and the garrison in London was kind of holding him off. So he needed to feed his army. So he decided to come up north here to pillage the land. Now, when you think of Vikings, you always think of these guys jumping off long ships, running into the village, killing the men, raping the women, stealing the gold from the monasteries and begging it off again. Well, that's a fantasy. That doesn't exist. If gold happened to be there when they came along, they'd have it, obviously, because they were villains. But mainly the Viking raids would take mainly place in the autumn. Can anybody guess why? The autumn.
No.
Right. Harvest.
Oh.
They came here for the harvest because they wanted to feed their people, and they weren't prepared to do it, so they let our peasants do it, and they'd come along and nick it. He needed an army to feed, so he came up here. The river there is a lot smaller today than it was in his time. If you see the Bales of Hay, the river actually would be lapping on the edge there. The valley running down from there would be a floodplains, so it was quite boggy. At certain times of the year it would be full of water, other times it would be just dry marshy land. We're talking about October the 18th, the year of our Lord 1016, and it was St. Luke's Day when the major battle took place. But let's travel a bit further back in time in that. Canute, when he came here, came with around about 7,000 men. He needed to raid as far inland as he could to get as much supplies as he could. So he hankered his armada, his ships, just on the other side of the ridge there. Anybody knows Burnham on Crouch will know that they got a marina there. Well, obviously that wouldn't have been there. It would have been rather flat and the river further in, so he could actually put his armada there. He couldn't bring it too far upland because although we've got a wide river here, it does narrow up towards Holbridge, where the Romans had built a bridge. That bridge was either pulled down or fell down in 1850. But when Canute was here, it was still up, and it was a godsend for him, a real godsend. Why would he come here? Very simple. He couldn't get any further upriver. He daren't harbour his ships up there because they'd be too close to the land. The English could be on them. They were made of wood. They would burn them. He had around about 300 ships, so that's a lot to lose. That means that his army was cut off and he couldn't escape. And of course he couldn't take off the bounty that he had. The only place he could defend his ships from would be that hill there, looking down onto the river. He placed his camp here, too far away, couldn't get to his ships in time. So the only place or defensive area would be the hill.
That's a tractor over there going.
Right, he landed, he automatically started on his offensive. He would have left 1,000 men behind, basically to build a makeshift fortress at the top of the hill, not a permanent fortress. He only hoped to be there for 3 to 4 weeks and then get out. So it would have been Brecon cut down just about that high, so you would have to try and climb over it. He would have a couple of lookout towers, plus he would have patrols travelling the area. He would leave around about, out of that 1,000 men, he would leave about 300 on board the ships to make sure that they weren't attacked or burnt. The rest would be patrolling the area. Now, the whole idea of patrolling this area was to kill every single person that lived here. And as the commander's point of view, that's a brilliant move, because he's in a land that he doesn't know. He's got a fortress there, he doesn't know the lie of the land here. So he will send his patrols out to find the lie of the land. But if there are villagers or people living here that later on can help the English get close to his camp, they will. So the only opportunity thing he can do is to kill them all. Men, women and children. The lot go. He doesn't hesitate. So they've established themselves. His army will march off here. Cast they come across the bridge, the whole bridge. Wonderful. He don't have to go right inland to go across. He can whip across and go up north. So he'd leave a couple of 100 men to guard that bridge, because he'd need that bridge when he comes back across. So out of the 7,000, there's 1,000 there. A couple of 100 at the bridge. Patrol also the land around it to make sure this. Sorry, my darling. Don't. Time is there for all. He would have to make sure that nobody would take that bridge and stop him getting across or pull it down, and then there was no other way around. Across he goes up towards Malden and across. Now the next thing we hear about him in the chronicles is that he meets the English army north of Oxfordshire. Is where the English army first come up against him. Now between Malden and Oxfordshire, large piece of land, isn't there? Lots of villages, lots of little towns. He's pillaged them all. He's gone through the lot. He's put the men to the sword, he's put the women to the sword that they don't want, and he's taken the children. Some of the men he will use as slaves to pull the ox carts, because once he gets to the farms and the manors, he needs to load all the stock, all the harvest into trailers and pull it back. Be attached to oxen, but better still, why? Keep the oxen, put slaves onto it. Make it so they drag it back to the hill here. That will take time. So he goes on forward and forward. Now by the time he gets to the north of Oxfordshire, he's down to about 2,000 men. He meets the army of the English, 10,000 strong. Now, you don't need a mathematician to work that one out. But let's go a little deeper. The Danes, the men he's brought with him are professionals. They're killers. They raid and kill for a living. They're not pansies, they won't muck about, they do not show mercy, they do not believe in any Geneva Convention, and you say, sorry mate, I didn't mean to say, you slit your throat. These are the guys he's brought with him, they are professionals. They would have carried metal shields, they would have had long swords, they've had short daggers, axes and spears, and some would have had long big hammers with spikes in them. And they were professional fighting men, plus raiders. Now the English army, the young king was named Edmund Ironside. He was a young king of 22, he was a warrior king. He earned his spurs by always being at the front of the action. He would never be one of these kings who sat on a horse at the back of the hill and said, you lot go over there and do that. He's been respected because he fought in the front line always. He was a warrior prince and a warrior king. He would have had probably men at arms 400 or 500. Other barons that would have come to him might have brought a couple of hundred each. But let's say 700 or 800 fighting men. The rest were peasants. Make no mistake about it, they were just peasants. They knew that if the Vikings got to their land, they would kill them all and take all the harvest. So these men went to the front to join the army to help fight, as the king had called them. But now the peasant, he didn't go, he took his wife and his kids. So he's got a wife, maybe the grandmother came along, maybe half a dozen kids. Made up the army. We think of kids today, we think of kids of up to about 15, 16, then they're young. In those days, if a young man could pick up the sword at 11 or 12, he was a warrior. He fought the front line. So you see where we're going with this. Canute sees all this mass of bodies, he can't distinguish from too far away who's the women, who's the men, who's the kids. All he knows is this mass coming towards him. So he scarpers, he fights a rearguard action, making his way back. Now, for 3 weeks, the booty would have been slowly making its way back to the hill here. By this time, he's beat the English army and he pushed him back. 5 times he stops to fight a rearguard action. Just enough to give the English a little bit of taste of battle and then get the hell out of there. He must have caught up with his own men along the way, picking them up from the villages as you go, thereby strengthening himself. If the train or a caravan of bounty had not got further than that, he'd just kill them. He'd kill the slaves, kill the animals and burn all the stock. Burn the lot. He's not going to let the English have it. If he can't have it, they can't have it. But I would say he probably got 3/4 of his booty back there anyway. So he didn't mind losing that little bit. As he's come back onto the river's guarded by his men, he's across. The English are hard on his heels. Now, this is where the English army make their first slip. It's made up mainly, remember, of peasants. They've met the Danes 5 times, and each time the Danes have run. The average peasant doesn't understand tactics. He hasn't got a clue, he can't read, he can't write. He believes that God Almighty is the guy sitting on the horse over there. He's the Lord and Master. That guy has life or death over him. Not the man up there, but the man over there. He sees the Danes running. He thinks, they're frightened of us. Oh, we're so many, we'll overrun them, we'll beat them any time. And they believe that. And of course the barons let them believe that. it boasts the enthusiasm of the army. They arrive here. Canute is on the hill. The English army arrives here a little bit quicker than he thought they would. So now then, he's got a problem. His ships are out there, his boot is on the other side of the hill, and he's stationed there. The English army is stationed here. Now remember, the army that he's brought with him don't know the area. What's happened to all the people in the area? They've been topped. They sit and look at each other. Who's going to make the first move? Canute cannot afford to start loading his ships, because to load his ships it would take at least half his men. You think, well, hold on, how's that? Think of the boats that they came in. Viking ships. They haven't got planks you can drop down and just walk cattle onto. They've got to have all the stuff ferried out to them on rafts, on longboats. They've got to put block and tackle onto the side, pull them up, load the cattle on, load the sheep on, load the pigs on, load all the groceries, so you might say. That takes a lot of men. If he splits it and the English attack, he's not going to get them back in time, because it would only take out half an hour for a battle to sway. It would take him back half an hour to get all these men back. So he can't move. 7,000 men, 10,000 men. All in men, it covers the entire army.
Tractor.
He does know that every second that the English king sits here, more people will rally to his cause. The word would spread that he's got the Danes cornered. But Canute is a wiry old fox. What the young king didn't know, that one of his barons had actually worked at one time for Canute. Canute secretly gets in touch with Eric and makes a pact with him that if you delay the battle, I will give you castles, I will give you land, and I will give you gold. The baron turns and accepts the offer. The young king doesn't know this, and what does he do but puts this same baron in charge of half the army. The half of the army that he puts him in charge of has the archers in it. The archers are Welshmen from North Wales. Now, as history will tell you, all through English history, the English have used the Welsh archers from the Battle of Ashingdon onwards and backwards. The longbow was a real offensive weapon. These archers were mercenaries. They went to the guy that paid them the most money. Ironsides thought he was paying the most money. And the whole idea was that quarter his foot soldiers with the archers, when he draws the Danes out, would flank off to the right, go down. You see where the house there is by the woods? Well, apparently that wood has been there ever since that time, and the wood actually goes down a little bit deeper, but it's been there. The whole idea was that the army would move beyond there and stay there. The English army would go down across the swamp area, halfway across, to draw the Danes to them for battle. That was the plan. It seemed feasible, but nobody had told Canute that. That was the battle plan. Now let's go to the 18th of October, the morning of the battle. The church isn't here. This is not graves, this is campfires. Men and women are cooking, children are running around. This foliage here has all been cut down because the English will also want to see what's coming up towards them. The lookouts come running back to inform the king that the Danes are attacking. All the English can see is that there are a long line of Danes coming down, 2 deep, about 2,000 strong in one wave. Beyond them, a few hundred yards, is another wave, 2,000 strong of Danes. Beyond them is another wave, 2,000 strong of Danes, shield to shield, coming down. Now, the English peasants, they've beaten the Danes once, so they decide, we can do it again. And they start moving. But nobody's bothered informing the king. He comes rushing out the tent and his army's on the move. Eric manages to grab his part with the archers and goes off that direction. The king now realises that his army's on the move. Rather than stop it, it's in motion, use it. So he gets to the head of his army and leads them across the big field there you can see in wheat. Now between here and Canute Church is 3,000 yards as the crow flies. But who lives around here? Then you know what is out there then, don't you? The dip. Just before Canute, and on that line of trees there, the ground dips down for about 900 yards and rises up again. You can march an entire army through it and nobody would know it there. It's dead ground. But from here, it looks flat ground. The king doesn't know it. The Danes do. When the first wave of Danes come down, they disappear. And the English haven't got a clue where they are. They're thinking, well, are they behind the bushes? Are they behind the tree line? They must come out soon. They don't. Now the young king is in the lead. Of course his mind's going, what's happening here? Are they getting away somehow? So he speeds his men on. Now they're running across a bog. The mud must be up to about there. Now everybody's walked across a plough field or a bog will know what it's like. You have a terrible job dragging your feet out. These guys were trying to run. But so were the women, and so were the children. They get to the edge of the dip, look down in the dip, and what's facing them? 2,000 heavily harmed Danes are just sitting there. They haven't moved, they're not breathless, they haven't wasted their time, they're professionals, they're biding their time and they're waiting. The English are completely out of it by the time they did it. They are, put it in simple words, they're knackered. The men at arms might be a little bit fitter, but they're not as fit. They're not as nowhere fit at all, and the peasants are just out of it. They haven't got nothing left. But the king now has got a problem. If he turns his army around, the Danes will be on him. He is committed. The only thing he can do is lead the attack. He's a young warrior king, the people love him, he rallies, he charges towards the Danish lines and smacks into them headfirst. His men at arms join him and the wave comes forward. 5,000 people surge across there to hit 2,000. Remember what I said about the Danes? They were professionals. They took the clash. Now can you imagine the sound? Forget about that sound over there. 7,000 people coming together screaming for each other's blood. The clash on steel, the clash on wood, wood against steel, steel against flesh. Arms being hacked off, people being disemboweled, heads being slashed off, hands being slashed off, children being killed, screaming for their parents. The Danes do waver. They waver by sheer force of numbers. The English have hit them at 5,000 people. 2,000 give, but they give under control. They give ground. They do pull back, but they are warriors. They pull back organised. The English throw themselves on the spears. Because the Danes are moving back, they think they're winning the fight. And talking about them, there's a couple snuck up on us now. Look, watch these beggars, I'm telling you. So they think they've won the fight. So they surge. The young king rallies them more into it. But for every Dane that falls, 10 to 20 English fall. Think of the numbers. For every Dane, 10 to 20 English. And not women, not kids. Father sees his child go down, he's going to go to turn his back. Sword. The king realises now he's got a problem because the second wave of Danes comes down and back up the first wave. The third wave move halfway down. Where is his reserve army? He looks towards the woods. No army. Nothing. Where's the arrows? Nothing. The plan was they engaged them. Okay, they've engaged them deeper in enemy territory, but surely the Baron can realise that and move behind them. No. He pushes on. Maybe they've met another Danish force he doesn't know about. maybe it's a bit more boggy than he thinks. If I just fight another hour, they'll be here. So he urges his people on. The battle started at 9 o'clock in the morning, it ended at 6 o'clock at night, and it never took a break in all that time. If you was on the front, you was on the front. You couldn't go back. You were fighting for your life. Now then, it suddenly dawns on the king he's been betrayed. The Baron actually moves the army back. The Welsh archers don't give a damn. They're paid to shoot their arrows or not. The other English army, the rest of the English army, they might love the king, but after all, the Baron is their god. You do not question the Baron. If he says you wait here, you wait there. It might be that the king and him have devised an idea that this is what they're supposed to do, so they will not question it. And if he tells them to move back, they will not question it. Meanwhile, a group of 500 Danes break away and do a left flanking along. Now there's all woods down there. They come up towards about the side of the hill there. Left on here are the remainder of the royal family, the women and children that were too young for battle, and the women that was looking after them. That's all that's up here with a couple of old men to guard them. The king now realises he's lost the battle unless he can pull a miracle. What's the miracle he can pull? Kill Canute. He can see Canute on the top of the hill, rallying and directing his men. His main idea now is to surge forward, break through the lines if possible, kill the war leader. And he attempts to do it. And he gets on quite well. He actually cuts through the first line of Danes. He reaches the second line. He is slowed down, but he's fighting his way through. And then, that cry, the cry that changed history. The king is down. The king is dead. But he wasn't dead. But because he had pushed so forward at the main vanguard of the battle, he was a target for every Dane that could get to him. He was leading the apex as they went through, and he received a spear in the side. He fell to the ground. His men at arms gathered around him to form a shield. But he was a warrior king, he'd been wounded before in battle, so he'd got a spear in the side. So what? Stood up, tried to rally himself forward again. He fell down on his knees. He got up, he charged forward a third time, and again he fell. His men at arms realised he was finished. They picked him up, and they took him along the river bank and got him out of the battle. The other English army there is out of it now, you might as well forget them. The English here, the King's banner had gone. Anybody ever watched Trooping the Colours on television? You notice they walk up and down with the flag, with the banner? That's what they call Trooping the Colours. It tells you where the leader is, the king is, so that every member recognises their colours, and they ever decide the Queen's colour or the King's colour. Wherever a king goes in battle in the olden days, his colours would be above him. When they took him off the field, they could see those colours going. The people now knew they had lost their leader. The barons and the warlords left behind couldn't hold them. They broke. No leader, they run. They turn and run. The barons lost control of the battle. It was a godsend for the Danes. It was, open time at the slaughterhouse. They called up them on that field there and put every one of them to the sword, man, woman and child. At the same time, the Danes that had got around here launched their attack on this hill here and put everybody to the sword on this hill here. If you go inside the church, you will see a plaque dedicated to those people and saying that they were all killed on here. Canute won the day. The English army was destroyed. The young king had got off and he had gone to the Isle of Sheppey. Canute mopped up here, and now suddenly, from being a warlord going after a bit of bounty, he just defeated the English army, something he didn't expect to do. He had made a king run. It was his for the taking, so he took it. He had two choices now, some would say three. He could either go after the king and kill him and make him a martyr to the English. If he left him alive, the king could rally an army to him again and have another fight. But what if he made a treaty with him and they split the land? So that's what Canute decided to do. He got a message to young Ironsides. Young Ironsides agreed to it because he was quite badly wounded. He couldn't form an army. So he thought, if I sign this, it gives me time to get an army together. When they signed it, Canute had the northern part of the country, he had the south. But there was a clause that Canute put in the treaty, because he was also a politician as well as a war leader. He put in the treaty that if one of them should die before the other, the entire land goes to the survivor. Within 3 to 4 weeks after young Edmund Ironside done it, he mysteriously died. Now then, did Canute kind of help him on his way with a little bit of poison in the food? Did he die of his war wound? Apparently he was getting quite well, and then suddenly he took ill and died. So Canute had it all. The Baron, down there, the English army just disappeared, that was left. The Welsh archers went home, well paid, and didn't have to fight. But Canute started thinking, this guy worked for me, then he turned and worked for him, he might turn and work for somebody else. So he executed him. He didn't get his castles, he didn't get his gold, he didn't get his land. He killed him. Now, we all know that Canute went on to be king of this country, and he had sons. And one of the descendants of Canute was Edward the Confessor. And Edward the Confessor was a timid man. And if people demanded things out of him, he'd give them rather than have a fight. So when the Normans said, we want the kingdom when you go, he said, okay, all right. He said, you can. So when he died, William thought, well, that's it now. But of course we know that a baron called Harold took as the king of the country from his people and said, no, you can't. And then the Normans come at Hastings in 1066. They were fighting the land that was divided amongst itself, also that were fighting Vikings in the north. So I'll give you something to think about. If Edmund had not betrayed the king at that time and had fought with the king, it was a possibility that he might have won the day. If he had won the day and Canute had been driven into the sea, the Normans would have had no excuse to come and invade him. None at all. If the young king had lived and had children, and they had children, and they had established themselves at a good kingship, and they had rallied the barons and the noblemen to them, and had a solid foundation, when the Normans come, if they had come, they would have met a king who had his knights and nobles solidly beside him, a country fully behind him, that would be ready to fight as one against the Normans. And just maybe 1066 wouldn't have happened. So I ask you to think about, did our history change in Hastings in 1066, or did it change in that field in 1016 because one man betrayed another? By the way, the Pope was not happy at that time with Canute, because he killed all these Christians. So Canute, being another wily politician, as I say, he said, all right, then I'll build you a church, and I'll pay for it. The church is behind you. And that was built in 1020. That was the Battle of Ashingdon. We don't ask for any payment for the battle. If you wanted to drop something in the plate there,